And today we have another amazing episode of Page Chewing. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, PL Stuart. And today our guest is none other but the New York Times bestseller. Bestseller on all the lists. S.T or St Gibson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm so happy to be here. I
Of
was so
course.
happy to get the invite.
Oh, of course. Well, the honor is ours. So, just to get started, in case people live under a rock and are not aware of what you do in the bookish space, could you tell everyone just a little bit about your works and what you do?
Totally. Thank you for asking. My name is Saint. I write under S.T Gibson, and I primarily write gothic romance, which means that it's a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of horror, and a little bit of romance all mixed together. But I do really have a strong affinity for the gothic genre, and that is kind of the haunted little castle where I live as a creative person. I'm the author of A Dowry of Blood, which is the 2020, I think. It's a queer polyamorous Dracula's Brides retelling, and I have a couple of other vampire books in that kind of shared universe. And I'm also the author of the Summoner's Circle series, which is an urban fantasy romance series set in Boston.
Mm.
My work tends to be a lot about love and making love work in difficult circumstances, and also a lot about magic and religion and sexuality and the ephemeral, and a lot of those things that I find really, really interesting as a person. And usually there's some kind of magical creature as well.
I just saw PL nodding his head. You hit so many points for both of us and what we enjoy in our stories in that
Oh,
little
good.
summary. So I'm sure that we'll talk about all of these points in turn. But the one that I wanted to kind of start with here is the Gothic aspect. So, as someone who in university read a lot of Victorian literature, not all of it is Gothic, but
Yeah.
a lot of it tends to be. So, with the Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyres and Frankenstein's, that's not necessarily Victorian, but those
Sure.
vibes, right? Most people think of Gothic and think of the vibes specifically. It's
Hmm.
kind of all about the atmosphere. There are a lot of elements that make a Gothic book, but a lot of it comes from the atmospheric nature of it. And as someone who has read Dowry, I can say it's very much on the pages of Dowry as well, that Gothic feel. So not only have you written a historical book, but you've also written urban fantasy, and both are categorized
Yes.
by you as Gothic. So I want to
Yes.
know, what is it about the Gothic that inspires you? Because you seem to be able to put it on page in many different settings people wouldn't necessarily associate with Gothic. So what are the points that inspire you? And how do you go about putting those things on the page?
I love that question. Thank you. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that in that specific way. You teed me up very, very well. Um, so yes, I'm a big lover of the Gothic. It was a genre that I've kind of always been interested in, but really came to it like a formative part in my teen years, getting really into Anne Rice, obviously grandmama on whose shoulders I stand. She's a huge influence to me. But also Frankenstein, Wuthering Heights, Pan's Labyrinth, The Phantom of the Opera, like these are really influential kind of touchstone pieces of media for me, and they're ones that I keep returning to. So I like what you said about how a lot of times folks who maybe know that they enjoy Gothic literature or stories, but they haven't, read or watched enough of them to be able to kind of distinguish the sub archetypes or whatever. The first thing you can pick up on is this sense of atmosphere, which is usually historical, or at least it feels somewhat antiquated and out of time. It's the spider webs and the crumbling manor and the running away in my sheer night dress with the candelabra, which we love. We love. But I also sometimes think that Gothic can be identified on a deeper layer by certain like tropes that are really prevalent in the work. And I use that term lovingly. Tropes are just the building blocks that we use to tell stories, and we mix them up in new ways and tell new stories. So again, kind of the cursed family line, the family curse or the family secret, the ancestral manor that kind of is alive and a little bit malevolent and might even have a mind of its own, a la Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, another favorite work of mine that I would categorize as Gothic. We think of the Gothic heroine, who is usually like young and vulnerable, and there's some sort of economic or sexual threat, like her inheritance is going to be taken away or she's going to be married off. And then kind of the brooding Byronic Gothic hero. These are very, very gendered archetypes, and I like to play with them and mix them up. But we may also recognize those. So those archetypes and those tropes are ones that I do like to kind of put in different situations and in different moments in time, because those tropes and those themes and what they have to say about humanity really, really speak to me. And some of those are prevalent in evocation, which I'll touch on in a second, kind of as an example. But the third thing for me that really draws me to the Gothic, that I always feel like all of my books are in conversation with, and maybe I'll write a book someday that isn't Gothic, but every time I say I'm going to do that, about halfway through, I'm like, well, we did it again.
The candelabra has appeared, right?
literally, like, we're locked in an old library studying arcane secrets somehow once again. For me, the Gothic, and this is my personal definition, I don't think this is like the Webster's dictionary definition, but what is so attractive to me and why I feel like I really have the space to play here, and what I hope I bring to any of my Gothic works, is this sense of like the juxtaposition of light and dark, the beautiful and the grotesque, sacred and the profane, love and eroticism and horror. There's these big operatic human emotions and experiences that sometimes we see as mutually exclusive, like sacred, profane, they don't go together. Horror, eroticism don't go together. The Gothic says, yes, they do. What would happen if we put these things that have this delicious friction and tension together and explored kind of the really high highs and the low lows of what the human experience is like, in a little bit of an operatic, over the top, campy, Rocky Horror Picture Show way. So I think that is what I do in a lot of my work. I use Gothic settings and atmosphere and tropes and symbols to really kind of take the emotions up to 11 and explore usually what it does to character and to relationships, because I'm a super character driven writer. I just care about humans and relationships. Like anything else is reverse engineered around that. So to answer your question in a smaller way, because I rambled a little bit, yes, evocation is an urban fantasy. It's contemporary. We live in Boston. We're a lawyer. Like I have Instagram, and I want it to feel like a celebration of modernity and living magical and religious traditions and the city of Boston, and being 30, in the era that we live in and trying to figure it out. But I'm also bringing in that idea of like the ancestral manor that kind of has a mind of its own, and the family curse that's in the blood, the sins of the father that get passed down that we now have to reckon with and kind of exercise it and get it out of us before it destroys us, which is very, 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 very Gothic. David is in some ways kind of a Gothic heroine, even though he's also, a very masculine, over the top, urban fantasy, psychic, overpowered hero. And I had so much fun putting those two character archetypes together in one character that don't usually go together, because I also love John Constantine and I love the Night Strider books, and like I love the shoot 'em up bang bang urban fantasy. So yeah, evocation is me, and the whole Summoner Circle series is me trying to bring some of those Gothic motifs into a contemporary setting and have the book still feel contemporary and fresh and fun and a little bit lighter, while also digging into some of those heavier Gothic things. It was a very long answer, but it was a very good question.
That's what we're here for. Please do not apologize. Like I am living for this, because as someone who loves delving into the themes of the Gothic and that kind of Victorian manner, I love hearing you talk about those themes that I recognize so well and talk about how you've integrated them into another setting, because that is the beauty of themes and tropes. And I think it's a good caveat. You mentioned it them lovingly, because I agree with you. Being able to take those things we know allows you to play with them because people know them, right? So that's kind of the beauty of the tropes and the themes. And I love the idea of, the candelabra being transported to Boston. I really dig that.
I got to put a candelabra in the next one. I got to do it.
Please do. I'm a search for that.
And I do really quickly want to shout out the fact that as I have come to this point in my career and realized that I want to do Gothics continually and kind of set my tent up in this genre and explore things in a contemporary setting, some of the books that allowed me to realize that I could do that and that it didn't have to be a Victorian European manor on the moors, as fun as that setting is, are books like Mexican Gothic and books like the work of V. Castro and KM Enright and other authors that are writing from outside of this super white, super Western, super straight cis hetero lens. And I was so excited to see people doing Gothic stories that were in like deep context and a deep conversation with their background or their religion or their ethnicity or sexuality. And that really gave me permission to be like, I can do whatever I want. I can
Yeah,
put it wherever I want.
as a
So
matter
I
of
do have
fact.
to shout out some of those authors, and particularly like Mexican Gothic. That was a big moment for me where I was like, oh, like you can do really, really cool things with this if you're just not so tied to one environment.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I think translated well, uh, will translate well from Gothic to any setting is the idea of the subliminal. Like
Yeah.
there's so many, Gothic is so over the top in so many ways with the atmosphere and the dramaticism of it. But what it's really dealing with is a lot of the repression and things under the surface. And that kind of
Mhm.
dichotomy is something that I think can be transported to almost any setting. And
Absolutely.
as someone who gave Dowry 5 stars, like on page 1, essentially,
Oh,
I
thank you.
I do think that that those 2 layers are what some of the things that make that so successful, because we're dealing with this
Mhm.
underlying uncomfortable bubbling of what's under the surface. No one can really put their finger
Yeah.
on it in this over the top setting. So,
Yeah.
I think you've shown a mastery of those 2 different aspects of Gothic, and I have, I'm so excited to see that being transported into a different setting with odd spirits and with evocation and all of that. But I
Thank
see
you.
PL nodding his head like crazy over there, so I want to pass it to him. Did you have any comment on that, PL?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. But I want to ask you, Saint. So you
Yeah.
talked about essentially, you kind of laid out your love letter to writing Gothic stories. You talked about some of the things that you absolutely love about it, and and in my head, as you're talking, I can see in my head the gloomy, decaying, haunted houses and the trap doors and the architecture with the gargoyles and
Oh,
the
yes.
zombies and the vampires and damsels in distress and curses and prophecies. But so, what do you think are the things that for your readers, and specifically about all things Gothic, that attracts them that are not necessarily the same things that draw you in? Maybe based on reviews that you've read, things that they've highlighted
Mm.
that, oh, I didn't realize that that was something that you
Yeah.
loved about Gothic. What are some of the things that you think that are, I mean, clearly New York Times bestselling author doesn't just happen. So kudos to you. So clearly a lot of readers love your work, and of course they love it for a lot of the same elements that you highlighted. But what are some of the things that readers have noted outside of that about Gothic writing that they love?
Yes, that's another wonderful question. Thank you, PL. I think I really only kind of have my own perspective on this, but from talking to readers and signing lines and seeing the reviews that I'm tagged in and hearing people sometimes, and this can be very useful as an artist, as a writer, but just as an artist in general, the artists that people put you in conversation with, and then the people that you get invited to do events with because your work has similarities, you're like, oh, I see what's drawing people in. I see what's coming across strongly that people are resonating with because I can identify it in this person's work and I see how it's complementary to me. I had a very similar experience when I was doing that with Ava Reed recently, who is wonderful and talented. And I was like, oh, I see where our readership overlaps. So with all that in mind, something that I love about the Gothic that really resonates with me and gives me the space that I kind of need to play and really get into the weeds of the things I want to talk about is the space that the Gothic makes for the interrogation of, or the celebration of, or just the depiction of the taboo, whatever that may be. So people who are having experiences or are occupying societal roles or have bodies or desires that put them in the margins or that make them inherently taboo, or the fear that there's something inside you that makes you inherently kind of taboo and like you should only exist in the shadows and speak of this in whispers. Love that. And I think that's something that I really am drawn to as a very deep feeling person, but also as a queer person, as a person who has a pretty complicated relationship with religion. The Gothic really gives me space to get in there and kind of get my hands dirty, because like we're already having these conversations. And whether, to your point, Taylor, you're coming at it from the lens of like, this is what's under the surface, this is what's being repressed, or this is the thing that the Gothic environment allows to be expressed and come out, and we can have, you know, whether it's the sex scene or the argument or the articulation of character in these big environments. I love that. So things that I've heard from readers that I think that they resonate with in my work consistently, and these are things I'm really proud of, and I want to continue to do the best as I can for people because they matter to me too. One of them is that I depict, people will say messy relationships, which I agree with, but I think what they mean by that is like love, friendship, family, eroticism that has a that also kind of has an underbelly, whether that's something that we're working on and we're talking about and we're coming together in a more mutually healthy love, like evocation, or something where like this is the rot at the heart of the fruit that needs to get cut out, like in a dowry of blood. I'm really interested in the way like when you love someone, love is kind of terrifying. Like you have to be vulnerable and you have to be willing to get naked, both literally and, you know, figuratively. And love changes you. To be loved is to change. And that's kind of scary. And also love can inspire us to do amazing acts of selfless heroism or horrible war crimes. And I think I have that balance in my head always when I'm writing a relationship, whether it's a more straightforward love story or a more complicated like sibling relationship, and people really resonate with that. And I feel like because the Gothic has space for the light and the dark, I can get into those things and I can get a little bit more messy and it doesn't feel out of place. If I was doing a rom-com, I could probably make it work, but it might feel a little bit more out of place. And then I've also been told that people really appreciate, which means the world to me, the fact that a lot of my work does have religious or spiritual or magical themes. Like I take the ephemeral and the supernatural, or just someone's interior spiritual life, whatever that means to them, really seriously. And I factor that into everything I'm writing. I did go to grad school to become a priest before I decided to write sexy romance novels instead. So it's something I think about a lot. And I have like a bottomless appetite to learn about people's approaches to philosophy or religion or magic, whatever that means to them. And, you know, whenever I put that in a book, I'm like, people are going to be so bored. Like they're going to tune this out. And then people really resonate with it. So that's been encouraging to me to keep exploring the things that matter to me and keep explicitly putting them on the page. And also people love that I write a lot of queer characters, and I have a lot of bisexual characters in particular. And like my bisexual readers are very, very devoted, which I'm happy to have them. I'm honored. I'm honored to have anyone, but especially someone that specifically sees their experience in these messy characters that are allowed to be human and don't have to be perfect, but also aren't ontologically bad because of the way that they love or the kind of sex they like to have or the kind of relationships they like to have.
There are so many points there that I had questions for. So
okay.
I will pick the one that at the end there, that when I was doing a little bit of research for this interview, let me tell you how excited I was when you mentioned that you love Van Helsing, because I will support that movie till the day of the day. I love Van Helsing, and talk about being bisexual. Kate Beckinsale in that movie is my bisexual awakening. Okay, I pinpointed
many cases. It's a great one.
That very moment I saw her on screen. So I wanted to bring up a couple points just because both of us clearly share a love for that. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up is, one, is it true that the brides were the inspiration for giving a different perspective on Dracula's story, the brides from that? And two, that movie shows the intricacies of what would be a polyamorous relationship. And you often say that you want others to, and you also aspire to write towards joy, right? That's a quote that I've heard you say a lot.
That is one thing I say. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's a beautiful sentiment. And clearly, you are given joy, or you get joy from writing about the intricacies of the human condition and love, as you just mentioned. So what is it about polyamory specifically, which seems to be a reoccurring theme in your books, that gives you joy to explore those themes? Like, what is it about that specifically? So kind of two questions there. You can take that from any point that you'd like to.
No problem. Another wonderful question. Thank you. Yes, you are right. You've done wonderful research. A Dowry of Blood would not exist without the 2004 smash hit blockbuster. And by that, I mean not a very big critical success film, Van Helsing, which I love very, very much. And if
Yes.
anyone is listening and hasn't watched it, it is so fun. They fit like as many classic horror monsters as they can into one film. Richard Roxburgh is a phenomenal Dracula. I think Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale do a great job. Their Frankenstein is wonderful, but everyone knows what movie they're in, and they're all like chewing the scenery at the same level.
Yeah.
And it's just a shoot 'em up, bang bang action fest with some plot holes, but like you can ignore that. It's truly joyful.
Yes.
And I can tell that that film, which was made by Stephen Sommers, came from his deep love for classic Universal monster movies. It's a love letter. But yeah, I saw that film when I was like 12 or 13, very impressionable, you know, little queer but deeply religious closeted creature in the deep South. And I was so into the brides. I thought they were amazing. Like they were beautiful and monstrous. But to your point, one of the reasons that I like Van Helsing that I don't think it gets enough credit for is a lot of movie depictions as the brides are just like scary, sexy backdrop, which is fun, no problem, I'll take it. But Van Helsing, in kind of a campy way, but that I do think comes from a very earnest desire to explore this, they show kind of the brides and Dracula like trying to make this polyamorous situation work and like bickering and kissing and making up. And like a lot of the plot revolves around the fact that they want to have children. Like it's quite literally like an immortal vampire polycule that lives in an ice castle that is on and again, off again, and trying to make it work. That's in this action movie. And I like imprinted on that so hard when I was a kid. I was like, I want to be in a vampire polycule. So yeah, it does come from that love. And that movie was the first, it really planted the seed of how much I loved the brides specifically for me. And I would always look for them in any other Dracula movie I saw or any other Dracula retelling I read. And at a certain point, I was like, I think you just want to write a whole book about them. Like, I think you just need to do that. But the seed does come from Van Helsing, which is a movie I love very much. Also, big bisexual awakening film, obviously. I was like in love with and wanted to be a Lyra, who's the redheaded bride who has that weird thing with Kate Beckinsale's character.
Yep.
So to that end, I think a major reason that again, it's kind of like how I say I'm not going to write a gothic and then a candelabra appears. Like I promise you, sometimes I sit down and I'm like, I'm going to really do it to them. I'm going to do a monogamous romance. They're going to never see it coming. But I think because of what I'm interested in and because of where my heart is, a lot of times more people appear and complicate the relationship in a good way. And I am a person who's very like high risk, high reward when it comes to my relationships and to love. And yes, I do from an artistic perspective, like it does up the drama. It ups the soap opera equality in a way that is like fun and enticing and creates friction and tension. And it's a good thing to reach for as the author. But I'm always deeply dedicated to like giving everyone their time in the sun and not just using it for come look at this, dysfunctional situation. I always want to present these relationships with real love and care and humanity. Like these are real people. And I genuinely love love. Again, I think love changes us and love asks a lot of us. And it is scary and it can be risky, but it is really, really worth it. And I think that I want to encourage more people to see opportunities for love and connection in their life, even in places where they might not expect them, which does not mean you have to go open your marriage. Like it can be a friend, it can be a pastor or a sibling that is inviting you into love, or the lady at the grocery store. Like I want to encourage people to see human connection and care as not something that is a zero-sum game that is finite, but that is like this eternally renewable resource, like this fire that if you feed it and you take care of it will never go out. So that's just kind of where my heart is on that. But I also like again, when you add more people, when you add another ingredient to the cocktail, once I stopped being like, there is no rules here, like I can just do any kind of relationship configuration I want, as long as I can make it work and make the audience believe in it and root for it. I have so many more narrative options and so many more avenues for growth and friction and change, and so much more avenues for eroticism and for tenderness and for personal growth. So yeah, I'll probably just keep doing this, because every time I'm like, just two people, I'm gonna play on easy mode. I'm really gonna surprise everyone. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. I think the closest I do have is, I will give it its credit, and I did this intentionally. The closest I have to a monogamous romance is Education and Malice, because
Mhm.
it is really the two girls who have their love story and are locked into each other, little binary stars. It is a dyad. But the professor that they're both pining after does complicate things, so that's about as close as we get.
That is just such a gorgeously beautiful answer. I just need to sit with that for a second. But I saw PL nodding his head too, because I know in your books, PL, as well as just in these interviews you said often, that you are a champion and have always been a champion of romance, right? Because it's a part of the human condition. And it's
Mhm.
something that in fantasy, specifically adult fantasy, gets a bad rep unnecessarily a lot. And so we've talked about that quite often. So I wanted to open the floor to PL there if you had any comments based on what Saint said, because I know this is something close to your heart too.
Well, first of all, Saint's answer, some things you said were absolutely profound. But I did want to touch on the fact that, and yet, you know, romance gets a bad rap in traditional high fantasy. However, what is all the rage generally in literary fiction? It is romantasy. It
Mhm.
is centered around relationships. It is, and now, and I loved what you were saying about, especially seeing the diversity in terms of relationships represented, not just queer relationships, not just bisexual relationships, but these polyamorous relationships. You know, so much of what, I think we are chasing, a lot of us in what we read, is to read books that reflect ourselves, the
Mhm.
people, our next door neighbors, the people that we feel that we'd like to see more of in literature, and there's an absence of them in literature. And that's
Yeah.
what I love about books such as yours, Saint. That I I always wonder when you read certain books and like you see certain societies that are so well fleshed out in every way, but they don't have gay relationships, they don't have bisexual
Yeah.
relationships, they don't have, and I'm not saying that that absence necessarily means that they don't exist, that they don't exist in the author's mind, but the author just
Mhm.
elected for whatever reason not to write about them. But I think
Mhm.
that one of the reasons why I don't attribute the rise of romanticy to simply, I guess, what people would say your cardboard cutout, boy meets girl, has,
Yeah.
and it's in a fantasy setting with like vampires and werewolves. In my mind, it's the popularity and the ascendancy is because of books like yours that depict all these wonderful relationships of all kinds, and yes, the messiness and the chaotic elements, and just I think because what it comes down to for me is realism, and that's what I
Yeah.
chase and what I crave in my fantasy. And that's why, another reason why, although I haven't read your books, what I've heard from people who do love your books, and I have quite a few friends that do, including Taylor, that it's all about realism, and that's what draws
Mhm.
me into a book, when I see elements and aspects of life that are that when the author puts them on the page, that's real. That's so real. That's so accurate, so gritty. And maybe, and again, the reality in that, perhaps it's a reality that is suppressed, that isn't spoken about, as you said,
Mhm.
in broader areas. But yeah, that's what I love about books like yours. But what I want to ask you though is that, I talked about the ascendancy of romanticy, and we know that in terms of publishing trends come and go, right? Today this is in, tomorrow this is out.
Yeah.
What do you see? Do you foresee? So maybe it's a two-part question again. We love our two-part questions, so you have to forgive us.
Let's go. Double
Clearly
header.
we do.
Do you foresee this general trend in romantic fantasy, however you like to quantify it, continuing for an extended period of time? And if not, then what is the next big trend that you see coming for literary fiction?
I actually might have an answer to this. Wow. Sometimes when I get asked about trends, I'm like, I don't know. But I actually do have feelings about this. So first of all, something I do want to caveat my answer with is something that I believe that I've just seen to be true from my time working as an author. I also worked as an agent for a couple of years. I've worked in acquisitions and audiobooks. So I've kind of seen this from a couple of different angles. It does not make me an expert or the voice of God, but it has given me perspective. Is that a lot of times when you have what I would call a micro trend or like a flash in the pan trend, kind of the things that, agents warn their clients about, being like, hey, like, I know you're excited about, I don't even want to make up a trend because it probably exists. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. You're excited about this trend. And I get it. And you can write about it, but just so you know, probably by the time that it gets to me and it gets on an editor's desk, it'll be a couple of years and those slots for those micro trend will be filled. So like, don't hang all your hopes on like writing this trend. That's a lot of where this advice comes from. And it is generally good advice. But I have noticed that even with those trends that do only stick around for 2 or 3 years, which tends to kind of be like the acquisitions and publication cycle, let's say 3 to 5 to really round it out, they go underground and they go indie because people read them and they realize, oh my gosh, I'm going to use something, even though it is still very popular. I love alien romances, like the Ruby Dixon, Ice Plant Bryans. I haven't read them, but so many of my friends have. I'll get on it because I love it. I love a monster romance. But I love alien romance, or I love, what was the other one it does really, really well in indie? It has a term. Military sci-fi is another one that kind of had a flash in the pan moment, but like those are strong. And people realize they love them. They realize they can go to these authors who are still self-publishing them or publishing them indie, and they really support and build these careers. And then sometimes even once that gets enough traction, the trend then comes back around in trad, because trad's like, oh, never mind. I'm so sorry we broke up with you. You're doing so well for yourself. You've really got your life together. Do you want to get coffee? Like, that's kind of the energy. So I never want to say, like, even if a trend that you're seeing in trad seems to kind of be there and gone again, it has roots and people are probably finding it in backlist or in indie. And they're recommending books that have similar vibes because there's a reason that people resonate with that, and that interest doesn't go away. The market just often can't sustain a big onrush of trad books in that micro genre for more than 3 or 5 years. So that's my hot take on that. But for romantasy, I do think it has staying power, even in this kind of wave we're seeing in traditional publishing, because I think it's building on genres that have been here for a long time. And I think something that I love is people are recommending romantasy books that are romantasy books that came out 15 years ago that we just didn't call romantasy. It's just a really good fantasy book with a really strong romance plot. And I love that. And those books have stood the test of time. Like, it's true. Like, what else is Kushiel's Dart except a phenomenal fantasy series with a strong through thread of eroticism and romance? Like, that's a really good, example. There's many others that also fit this bill as well. Or maybe you don't even know that it has stronger fantasy elements or stronger romance elements until you're into the book and you're like, oh, this is a really good marriage of the two, which is typically what I think people mean when they say romantasy, but it's a very nebulous term that seems to change every week. So don't put that on me to define it. But I think that's what people mean when they're like, I want to be swept away in this well world built, satisfying, high stakes, usually second world fantasy story. And I want the heart of the story to be a big feelings romance that has some tropes I like and that makes me, laugh and cry and stuff. So, but I do think for that reason, romantasy probably has staying power. And it's the combination of two major genres that people are very dedicated to reading. Like, a fantasy reader is hardcore and a romance reader is pretty hardcore. So if you find someone who likes both of those together, they're probably going to continually seek that out. That's my answer to the first half of your question. The second half of your question was really good. And I talked so much, I forgot what you asked me what I thought the next big thing might be. My theory that I am rooting for, and I'm seeing it gain traction. This time I'm seeing it actually gain traction in indie. And people are starting to ask for, like, I want more things that feel like this, but I can only read a couple of books. And like, but I'm starting to see editors and agents be like, I read this and I really like this. Like, does anybody else have something that feels like this? Is horror romance, is the combination of those two things. And I can name names of books that I would say horror romance. A lot of dark romances, some of them are horror romance, and some really good, like, dark experimental fantasy and fiction, even short fiction, that also has like a strong element of a romance, whether it has a happy ending or not. We can get into that, but that just has this strong relationship focus. And again, the Gothic kind of falls into this category. So selfishly, I hope this takes off because it's good for me and my friends. But I am not as hardcore as a horror writer as some of these other people are. I touch horror and I love her and I blow her kisses and I live there, but I also dabble in other genres. But I have, colleagues who are really strongly rooted primarily in horror, but they want to introduce more of those big feelings and those emotional stakes that come from romance. I would say, like, I can name dark romances all day long because I love reading those, but something like Monster of Eldenhaven kind of falls in this category. That one came out a while ago, but it's really good. I think about it all the time. People like K.M. Enright, who wrote Mistress of Lies. That's definitely like a romantasy, dark romantasy, but there are horror elements, there are body horror elements. And I think a lot of people who like the intensity of emotion and sensation and the fear and the catharsis of romance or of horror also realize they like that in romance. So that's my little theory. And I like to read it. So I want there to be more of it so I can read it. But it's something that is gaining traction in indie and people like Morgan Dante to a degree, but Raphael Nicholas and other folks are doing really cool things within indie as well.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there because I'm seeing a lot of those whisperings as well. And I'm not even
I'm hearing it in the air.
Yeah, I'm not even that entrenched in the romance world, and even I kind of got those whisperings. So also
Yes.
we have a Shield's Dark fan with us. Yay, Sarah Beth.
Yay.
So this is kind of a broader question. PL and I often say on this series that we are champions of indie and trad alike. We love. Half these shelves are indie and half are trad, and they're just kind of next to each other. And that's just kind of the way that we prefer to build our collections. So as someone who has been on both sides of the aisle, not in a versus way, but just in your experience way, what has been your experience of going from having that indie hit, which is why I think you're so, you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in indie, because Dowry was that, right? And that's what was the explosion point for you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
you're completely right.
To now being on the trad side, mostly at the moment, right? Not saying those can't be in conversation or in flux, but what has that experience been like, kind of going through that transition?
You guys, I love talking about this. You're just letting me talk about all my favorite things. I love this.
That's the point.
I'm genuinely always happy to talk about that because I still think not as much as there used to be. There are a lot of good resources out there, and there are a lot of authors who are hybrid in the sense of doing a little bit of indie and doing a little bit of trad. People like Katie Robert, Sierra Simone, like, who are just dominating and doing so well and really being able to have the support they need and the freedom that they need. And for some people, that is the right path. So like, I want to give them their flowers as well. I love indie. I did start publishing in indie, and a lot of my friends and colleagues and a lot of the people that I look out for and that I read are indie books. And I think, I'll just talk about my experience. So from my perspective, I think me finding my way into trad holistically was absolutely the best thing for me as an artist and just kind of as a person who has to work, like from both a technical getting the job done and like my art kind of perspective. Trad has been very good to me because in indie, I loved the amount of creative control I had over things like the covers and the release schedule and how long the book was. Dowry is only 50,000 words. It's barely a novel. It's longer than a novella, but it does not feel like a novel. And I seriously doubt that word count would have got through any agent, because it's right in between. It's weird. It's hard to sell. Either cut 15K or add 25, but I didn't want to. It was the right amount to tell the story. So I was able to do things like that. I was able to find the cover designer that I wanted to hire. I was able to do it in my own timeline. I love that freedom and flexibility and that sense of spontaneity. And I need a little bit of that as an artist. I need to be a little bit like, I just feel like doing this. Like, it keeps me engaged and energized and interested. But I found that a huge source of stress for me that actually impeded me getting the work done and impeded me getting things done on time or at all, it just kind of caused me to be really anxious and not super pleasant to be around, was if you go indie and you don't have a team that you've hired, especially if you're early on and you're kind of doing everything yourself, all of those decisions are your responsibility. And if they go poorly, you're the one who made the decision. So I kind of got into this echo chamber of like, I hope this is the right cover. I guess the blurb is fine. And I could ask my other friends and I could ask other indie authors. But I do personally, so not all authors, personally, I do better with the structure of more people weighing in from their areas of expertise. I actually feel a sense of peace and ability to just focus on my work and writing the best book I can and promoting it in the way that I want to, when I know that the design team knows what they're doing. They know what covers look good in the market. They know how they're going to brand this, and they bring me options. And I say, I love number 2. I love to sign off on things. I love to sign off on things. And I love having a editor, and I've had really good relationships and experiences with both of my editors at Angry Robot and at Orbit. Shout out Eleanor and Nadia. I'm very, very spoiled. And they make me better, and they make me think of things that I wouldn't think of, even from bringing something to, my fiance, who's also a writer, or to my writer friends. And they keep me on track and they keep me on deadline. And I can't just go into a corner and spiral, because there are people who are waiting on things from me and they don't get to move their job along until I've done my part. And actually being part of a little, like a Rube Goldberg machine where all the pieces are affected by each other, I've found is really good for my creativity, and really good for my desire to see things through to the end and to do them well and to share with other people, because I'm really motivated by that sharing and that social element. So knowing like, well, my editor is waiting on this for me. I told her she would have it in October. And if I give it to her, she'll tell me what she thinks. That's very motivating. And it prevents me from getting into that anxiety kind of freeze response where I'm just like, I don't know what to do. These are too many decisions. However, I have friends who are in indie who, even if trad came knocking with a beautiful deal, would not take it, because indie is so good for them and the way their brain works. And it allows them to produce exactly the kind of work they want, with precisely the right art and formatting, released on exactly the right schedule that works for them financially and in terms of their energy and responsibilities. And I have friends in trad who need even more structure and guide rails and sounding boards than I do, who are like, I would cry if I had to do this indie. So I think it really comes down to, and a lot of this is trial and error. I wouldn't know this if I hadn't done a couple indie books and then done a couple of trad books. I have great aspirations to be hybrid in the future, but we'll see if I can do that. But I do think it comes down to kind of knowing what you need as an artist and what makes you the most reliable and helps you keep promises to yourself. Is it more people in the room with you, or is it less?
Mm-mm-mm. Well, I love hearing it from the perspective of a collaborative process rather than a bogged down process, which is what people tend to categorize trad as. So just shows, looking at it from a different perspective can shed a different light on the structure, right, that you're talking about.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I'm sorry, did you want to?
Nope, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, and I know that PL and I both love to read in our books, and that's the idea of religion. So I'm sure we could talk about this for a long time.
Let's go.
Ready, because both of us, this is something we adore in our books. And I often say that I love people talking about religion as a power structure, not just a belief system, but as a structure in the society. And I want to pair this with you in your more urban fantasy. You talk about that the magic systems are based in real world magical practices or belief systems. And having studied theology yourself, having a master's in it, that's also a very real world connected thing for you.
Yeah.
So often in fantasy, we view magic as not real and fantastical, and we view religion as real and grounded. But you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that you talk about it, you seem to view them on the same plane, right? And you kind of
Yeah,
use them in conversation with each other. So I wanted to ask you
totally.
about how you use those two parts of your writing to explore certain themes, and how you like to use them to flesh out your stories. So how do you deal with those two aspects in conversation with each other?
Yeah, I tend to approach writing magic and religion, and I will get into why I don't think that's a clear dichotomy here in a minute, but I tend to approach writing those things in my work, particularly anything contemporary, anything that happens in our world. So Summoner Circle series, basically, the Evocation and Odd Spirits are out now. There's 3 more books coming, but whole Summoner Circle shebang. I do try to approach them, especially from the perspective of the character and the practitioner. Like, this is equally real to them. It's also maybe equally nebulous. People are having conversations of like, what do I believe versus how am I feeling today? Do I think the spell is working, or do I think I'm reading into it? Like, it's a lot of the conversations that we have with ourselves, just as people who kind of live in a world, whether you are a religious person or not. And I wanted to bring, and I do a little bit too much of it sometimes, and things get muddy. So sometimes I just need to say what I mean and tell the audience what to believe. But I do like to really try to make it feel as real as possible, because it's something that is so important to me in my lived experience, and something that I really take care to notice and celebrate and nurture in other people. Again, whatever their relationship to the idea of religion or spirituality or magic may be. But yeah, my one of my favorite parts about the Summoner Circle series, and certainly the nerdiest part about the Summoner Circle series, is I am by no means an expert in the traditions and the practices that I depict. I have been a practitioner of some of them, and I've known practitioners or interviewed them or just done a lot of research for other ones. And I'm really looking forward to I'm kind of blocking out like months to do more research next year for the next couple of books in the series. But they are all depictions of, or rooted in at least, real world beliefs and practices and diverse living traditions. Because people do this. People do believe this. This is a part of a lot of people's cosmology or their moral compass. And I like showing how it's really individual and unique to each person. Um, and also I love writing someone like, so I'll use these people as examples. So you have like, let's use the trio, right? Summoner Circle is ultimately a triad story between 3 magical people, a married couple, and David. And David is our primary character in Evocation, and he is a very powerful psychic. And that, to him, being psychic is real. That's just a Tuesday. He's been doing this since he was a kid. You can't tell him this is not like, he does seances and he reads auras for money when he was in high school. And like, literally his night job is he does seances for like people, and that's how he pads his paycheck, and it's just work to him. It has value, it has meaning, but like, it's very mundane. And he's also not a very religious person at all. He's not religious at all. He's just an atheist. He has some exposure in childhood to some forms of religion, and he's like, this is not for me. But his worldview is very informed by what he believes to be like the unseen world and how it affects our world from a really rationalist kind of perspective. He's a lawyer, so like that plays into this. You have someone like Reese, who is also a magical practitioner in David's tradition, ceremonial Western magic, which is kind of the summoning of spirits and trapping them in the seal chalked on the floor that maybe you've seen in movies like Constantine or something like that. Think Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley. They're doing that in the basement. But Reese is also very Catholic, and he has a very complex relationship to his Catholicism that deeply informs every approach he takes to magic, whereas David is like, religion and magic, they're totally separate. So like, and he's like, I don't believe in this, and this is totally real. They don't talk. So it's fun to have characters, and it's interesting, and I hope feels more real, that have different approaches. And then you have someone like Moira, who is able to move more fluidly between traditions and between belief systems, and honestly probably has the healthiest outlook on it, which is like take what serves you and what nourishes you and leave what doesn't. But every single person in that series has a different outlook on magic, philosophically or religiously, or just in terms of like seeing it as a science that they can manipulate, that follows rules and is not religious or spiritual at all, which I've known practitioners like that. And that's just a fun, nerdy thing that I get to do. And it's an excuse to continue to do a lot of the research that I find so interesting and celebrate these living traditions that I've seen around me, and kind of give them their moment in the sun. And the approach that I take, in addition to trying to do as much research as I can to not misspeak or stereotype too much, is keeping in my mind, like, whoever you're writing right now and however they're approaching this is their reality. This is where they live, and this is what they've chosen to, align their life with. And you have to approach that with a respect and a curiosity and a desire to really understand, like, what gears are turning when you make decisions that are informed by this. And to your point, Taylor, how are they in conversations with structure of power that might be actively harming the person in the belief system or people or communities around them? There is some tension, and this will come up more in book 2, but there is some tension with the fact that Reese is so Catholic, and his, atheist boyfriend is like, I hope you don't confess me to your priest. Like, there's tension there, and there's friction, and it's an invitation towards deeper intimacy and towards personal growth, but it is complicated. But I love complicated. That was a very rambling answer, but I think I hit on your question.
Oh, you did. Oh, you very much did. Yeah. What always strikes me as religion as a power structure is the only thing that seems to differentiate it from belief systems that people would tend to dismiss easily is time. It's been around longer. It's been around longer, or those in power have chosen that belief. Therefore, it has its roots in our structures, right? So when you get down into the intricacies of personal belief, when that personal belief gets elevated to a power structure, that's where a lot of the change or a lot of the differences lie, in my personal opinion. And that's something that
agree with you.
That fantasy does not shy away from, typically. Talking about that, well, the fantasy we like anyway, doesn't shy away from talking about that as could be a positive force, could be a negative force, but it is a powerful force nonetheless. And I know that's something that PL has in his books too. So I wanted to, again, open the floor for PL, because I love this conversation. So let me reel myself back and let PL come in here.
Well, my question specifically for Saint is that I feel like, and this is a real dichotomy. So I grew up in a religious household. My mother was very, very formally religious, Anglican, and much of my family very formally religious. And the more I read through self-education and then formal education, getting to university, etc., the more I read, the more I felt I opened my mind, the less formally religious I became. And there's this internal conflict between, I feel like I'm betraying my faith. I feel that as my eyes are opening to the goods and the ills, particularly in specifically organized religion,
Totally.
that it was actually eroding my faith. So in some ways, and not that I was smart or getting smarter, I felt that the more enlightened I became, the less religious I became. But of course, I think what happened with me is I had to find this place inside me where I had to make this differentiation between faith and religion, and that there were two very different things for me, and frankly, that I believe they are two very different things, period, and sometimes competing and contrasting things.
Yeah.
So you are extremely well educated and you have a master's in theology, and you write books that have both magic, religion, as a faith. How do you reconcile where you are in terms of how you look at religion and faith and how you write about it?
Yes, that's a good question. So I do think a little bit of lore here will help. I will not get too deep into talking about myself, but a little bit of lore will help. I was raised in a ambiently Christian household. My parents were actually pretty mellow, God bless. But in late high school and into early college, for a span of like 4 or 5 years, I, of my own accord, got really, really into conservative evangelical Christianity. And I was trying to make myself fit into this world, even though it was actively hurting me and actively hurting my relationships with other people. Um, because I wanted so strongly that sense of, I was, yes, seeking belonging, and I was seeking meaning and a sense of living a virtuous life, the things many of us seek when we find religious communities. But there is something, I think, insidiously seductive in very high control or dogmatic religious communities that is like, if you just do what we say, you don't have to think, and you will be ontologically good, you will be safe, you will be protected, and we will offer you protection. And I think, and you don't know what you think. You can't trust your emotions. You just listen to us. We have centuries and centuries of knowledge. And I'm a big fan of centuries and centuries of knowledge. I do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I do think religions that have been around for a long time have sometimes workshopped some things that we can take away. But I just kind of pushed myself into that and tried to make it work, and had a big crisis of faith and a breakdown, and caused a lot of hurt to myself and other people in trying to push myself into this mold that ultimately just kind of chewed me up and spit me out. It was a very formative experience. But I knew that I was still deeply drawn to these questions of faith and how we use signs and symbols and stories to make meaning about our lives as human beings. Like, we've told these stories for thousands of years, like they mean something. The ritual means something. The prayers have power, but I think a lot of that meaning and power actually sits inside us and in our bodies, and not externally in the institution. Like, no one can take that away from you. This is how I was raised Protestant, on a side note, because I'm like, nobody can tell you no. Nobody can take that away. You can have it anytime you want. It's right there. Like, and I'm grateful for that. And then in college, I am going through a lot of changes, and I'm really grateful for the fact that that experience allowed me to really open up and explore other religious traditions. And that's when I kind of fell in love with learning about religion and spirituality as a discipline, sociologically. Like, I have really fond memories of like going to Wiccan circles and going to Rosh Hashanah services at the Jewish synagogue, and like learning about Eid from my friends. And that was really great. And then I entered grad school because I was like, I'm going to become an Episcopalian priest. I've got it figured out. And there are certain elements of that that I was really drawn to, and I'm still drawn to. I love connecting with people one-on-one and being like, how's your heart? What do you need? Here, I have a little basket of history and stories and rituals and traditions that are here for you if you want them. And if they're helpful, they were helpful to me. Maybe they're not helpful to you. And I like to do a little public speaking and do some nonprofit work. But that does not mean I want to be a priest. And through that experience, I came back to my first love, which has always been storytelling. I've been writing books since I was, or not writing books, but writing stories since I was really little. And I was like, I think what you actually want to do is connect with people and offer them, use your experiences and your thoughts and the stories that mean things to you, and give them as that little basket of tools to people. You don't have to do that inside of a church. So that's lore drop. That's very, that's more intimate, but I do think it really comes into play in my writing. So all this to say, I do find a lot of value in the things that we have kind of inherited as human creatures from the human creatures that came before us. But I think we have to be consistently kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Questioning, I suppose, is true, but it's more like
Inquisitive?
inquisitive. I like that. I'm actually going to use a Bible metaphor here, if you will allow me, because I like it. There is a parable in, I don't remember which one. I'm not being tested. I don't need to know this anymore. But basically, Jesus is talking about how will you tell like a good teacher from a bad one? And he says, you'll know them by their fruits. Like, what kind of fruit is the tree of your life bearing? So I always bring that attitude to any conversation I'm having with religion. Like, that is my baseline, is like, if I introduce this element to someone, or if I integrate this belief or this system into my own life, or if I cooperate with this institution, is the fruit of that tree going to be bigotry, harm, repression, poverty? Or is the fruit of that tree going to be connection, intimacy, care, mutual aid, all that kind of good stuff? So that is very much about me, but that's kind of the attitude I bring into everything. And when I find those little things that make good fruit happen in my life, of course, I want to put them in stories and give them to other people if it is useful to them and if they want to take them. But if not, there's just an apple tree right here. And you can say, what a pretty apple tree. And you can go to the pear tree, and that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I think, well, so many of those things resonated with me, but the one through thread that I think we can all connect to, no matter who's watching us or what their religious beliefs are, is that stories are integral to who we are. And they're
it's like the
integral.
foundation of human civilization is sitting around
Exactly.
this fire and telling each other stories.
Exactly. They feed us, you know, they
They do.
connect us. And so religion is based on that. So are other practices that are in your books. People might call them magic. People might call them, you know, whatever they decide to dub them. A lot of these traditions, or almost all of them, I would argue, are based in stories. And that's why we love these things behind us, right? So I think that it's a very logical transition for you to decide, if I would like to help someone, and it's not necessarily in this institution that I don't think I want to be a part of anymore, stories are the way to do it. I think all of us can connect to that.
Yeah.
But what I would like to do now is shift a little bit more to a not necessarily lighter, but different
A little lighter.
lens, and talk about the Summoner Circle series specifically, because I know you've got all of your releases coming out this year. Odd Spirits has released on the 8th, right? So that is your most recent release from Angry Robot, and I wanted to bring up a particular thing that I've heard you mention a couple times, which is writing the setting of the Summoner Circle was fun for you because, one, you love Boston, but two, the thing that you love about Boston is the dichotomy between the new and the old being together. And as someone who lives in Japan, okay, let me tell you, the new and the old being together is a part of my daily life. And it has always fascinated me as well. There'll be like a 1,000-year-old, literally, temple, and then a skyscraper. Like, that's just integrated into the life here. And it's always been like, when I see the shadow of the skyscraper covering the temple at a certain point of the day, I'm like, this is surreal. What's happening with this interaction right now? And
that's the juice.
Exactly. So that's what I want to know is, for me, I understand the fascination with it, but I'm curious what it exactly inspires. Like, when you see those things, how does that manifest in the Summoner Circle series, in the setting there?
So yeah, I mean, Boston is so essential to the Summoner Circle being what it was. Boston is like almost a character. Like, I don't want to put that on me, but that's basically what it is. Like, it's such a presence in the book. And the lore drop here on that is that I went to Boston with my now fiance on our very first anniversary. And we fell so in love with the city that we were like, we got to move here. And about a year later, we did. And I live just outside of Boston now, but we lived in Boston for 4 or 5 years, right in the city. And it was amazing. And to me, that is kind of the first city that I chose for me and with someone I love, that I didn't have to go to for work or school. So it's always going to be special to me in that way. I feel like how some people feel about New York, that, like, I also love New York. Oh my gosh, I need to go back. But that's kind of how I feel about Boston. So all this to say, I do love the new and the old in Boston. And this is very evident in other major American cities as well. But as someone who didn't grow up around a lot of this experience, I love how the landscape and the actual architecture and the way the roads are laid out in Boston have been so clearly impacted by, like, American history and where certain immigrant communities settled. And unfortunately, redlining, like good and bad. You can like look at the actual physical landscape of the city and you just see like hundreds of years of history. And I do love aesthetically, but also just in this sense of like, oh, it all exists at once. Like, going and seeing, going to the St. Mary's Cross, T stop and seeing that beautiful old church. And above it, you can see the skyscraper that's in DTX, or going into Cambridge and you're in Harvard, but there's also like small businesses and food carts and stuff by the street. Like that is really, really cool. So I just think there's so much life and vibrancy in the city. And to me, what I love in a city is a strong personality. I'm the kind of person who you take me to a city and you leave me there for 6 hours and I'm like, should I move here? Like, am I a Chicago girl now? Is she in her New York era? So I just love urban centers and I love the way human history and culture and food and money has like shaped them. And Boston is a little bit brusque, a little bit, and got my Dunkin' Donuts, don't talk to me, I'm going to honk at you in the street. But also there is love there. And there's a deep devotion to the city, especially people who were born and raised there, that I was like, I love this. I want to celebrate it. So yeah, and I think the juxtaposition specifically of that old and new is what to my little fantasy pilled brain just so easily sees magic in like every single alleyway. And that was always what I loved about urban fantasy when I was a kid, is like the fact that it was in a city made it feel like if you just took the wrong turn down an alleyway, you would like literally come to like a magical experience. And there's something about the quality of Boston that I can't even quite put my finger on that makes me really believe that's possible. And I do think it's celebrated and represented in the book, like the society meeting house where the main like secret society meets, especially in book one, is underneath a Cantonese restaurant in Cambridge. Like you literally go down like a little wrought iron staircase and you think you're gonna like get some really good food, and it turns out you're in like a basement that has been turned into a summoning room. But that's just how the city feels to me. And I love that about it. Love her.
Yeah, the possibility of the fantastical meeting the mundane. Cities. I tend to feel that more often when I'm in a nature setting. It's just kind of what works for
Yeah.
me. So I find it so fascinating to hear you talk about that possibility in such an urban,
Mhm.
busy center of human life. I
Yes.
think that, if you can put that on the page, that is the beauty of urban fantasy, right? The idea that it could exist actually right around the corner. You don't have to climb to the top of the mountain. It can actually be next door.
Yes, and I also like what you said about possibility. This is something I was thinking about earlier that I will actually articulate now. I think the connection, this is going to sound wild, but walk with me, go with me. I think the connection between my attraction to cityscapes and my love for depicting polyamorous romance and the reasons that I get so into religious and magical themes in my books, which again, I don't see that much difference between religion and magic, but I'll write an essay about that. That's neither here nor there. Is that sense of possibility. Like when you enter, for me, going like experiencing a big city for the first time is kind of a religious experience, because I'm like, human history, the experience of being alive. We're all here in the same moment. Like I am that person in Times Square. Maybe not Times Square, but you know what I mean. But also that quality about love and about magic and religion. It's that sense of expansiveness and possibility and being connected to something that is larger than you, that has been here before you, and that may be here after you. The more time I spend with myself as an artist, the more I'm like, I think that's actually the quality and the feeling that I'm always trying to explore. And I do think it's directly tied to the fact that I have a really strong sense of atmosphere in a lot of my books, and a lot of times that atmosphere is just like the city is a character, because to me it's alive. Like it's something bigger than me that I'm in awe of and I want to understand.
You've made me so excited to pick up the Summoner Circle. Like, we have no idea. I'm just sitting here soaking it all in. I'm so ready. And also I wanted to bring this up, is that Sarah Beth as well says both evocation and Odd Spirits are on my TBR on my shelf. So
Yay, I hope they treat you so well.
I hope, Sarah Beth, you've been convinced to bump those up. So, you've been so generous with your time. It always goes so quick. We are an hour and 10 minutes almost now. So this has been a wonderful, delightful discussion. But I wanted to ask PL if he had anything else that he wanted to mention before we kind of start the sign-offs and
yes. Anything else, I'm happy to chat.
Oh my gosh, so much. I just want to say quickly, I felt you when you were talking about cities. I am my wife calls me an urban junkie. She's the opposite, like Taylor. She loves the natural setting. She loves the rural settings, the pastoral. I'm drawn to. I don't know if you've ever read N.K. Jemisin's "The City We Became."
It's on my list. I'm so excited about that one.
And we're all the
character. That one, right there.
We're all the boroughs of New York City have characters. I want to go a bit, just what I've been dying to ask you, I want to go a bit, and you forgive me a bit off topic from the books, is that you have also been a literary agent.
I have, yes.
And you're an author, published author. How has that experience shaped you as a writer, both from the writing standpoint and from the business aspect? Because that's, we don't often find many authors who are or have been agents. There are some, but I think it's more rare, and it's kind of like almost like a never the twain shall meet thing. And I'm fascinated to hear a bit about your literary agent career and how that has impacted your writing.
Yes, absolutely. So I worked as an agent for the Spielberg agency for 2 years, and I love them. Like every agent at that agency, and particularly Alice Spielberg, who runs the agency, was phenomenal, kind, smart, shared their notes, really trained me well, which is not something every young agent gets at every agency. So I'm incredibly fortunate. They really showed me the ropes and, encouraged me to raise my standards and do my best work, but also showed me a lot of grace and was like, nobody learns this overnight. So I really have to give it to them. I did. I worked as an agent for just over 2 years, and it's kind of one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. Truly, I think in a different life, I would do that my whole life and be so happy. It ultimately was not super compatible with my time commitments and my writing, and also just the presence that I wanted to bring to the people in my lives. I think working to kind of high pressure, you're never really off the clock, an email can come in at any time sort of jobs, it's hard for anyone. And I think that's particularly why you don't see a lot of authors and agents at the same time. There is some quality of conflict of interest. There is some quality of people tend to find themselves pulled more towards passion for one or the other. But there are people who do both successfully, but they have really, really strong boundaries around their time. And I just didn't have that. And I was like, I can't, I gotta go. But I loved it, and I did learn a ton. And I do think it informs my author career. And I will say, to my credit and to the credit of other agents who also work as authors, I think the fact that I was a working author really brought an extra quality to my relationships with my clients, where I was like, I literally know what you mean. If you need me to buy you time, baby, I can buy you time. I know how deadlines work. Like, I know that baby is crying and your mom is sick and it's been a rough week. Just watch Notting Hill and I will get you an extension. So that was really, really great. I think I was able to advise on like a deeper craft level and a deeper career strategy level. And I really appreciate that I was able to do that. And I think my clients did as well. And I love them all very much. And I wish them well. And every time I see them get a book deal or announce something, I'm so, so excited. And I'm still close with many of them. But I think for me as an author, the thing that has kind of given me that I'm really grateful for, that I draw on a lot, is as an agent, you kind of have to, one of your main jobs, one of a big piece of the pie of the different things you do as an agent, is you have to be good at relationship building and management from a professional perspective. And I don't mean just like boozing and schmoozing at a con situation. That, sure, great, enjoy. but it's more like, how can I maintain these professional connections with editors, know when to check in with them, know when their tastes might be changing, to kind of read the room and be like, do you want horror now? Do you want this? Like, how are you doing? What's your reading time like? How can I make your life easier? And kind of meet in the middle with someone professionally and maintain a nurturing and a convivial professional relationship. That's really important as an agent. And I do think that I learned a lot in doing that I carry into the way that I interact with my own editors, my own publicity team. Because I just have a better sense of what their jobs are like and what their deadlines are like, and what they need from me to make their lives easier. So I'm grateful for that. And then I have always, this is going to make me sound cuckoo bananas because a lot of authors don't like this. I've always liked pitching. I like writing query letters, which was great when I was working as an agent. And I like pitching. I like, selling my friends' books to people by hand. And I like crafting the blurb on the back of my books. A lot of the blurbs that you'll read on any of the back of my books are mostly written by me. And then my editors come in and make it 100% beautiful, wonderful, and add things. But I like marketing. I like learning about the market. I like publicity. And I like learning how to specifically express what to expect from a book in a way that's going to find the right reader. And I think being an agent made me really, really good at that. Not to toot my own horn, but I do think it is one of my skills. And anytime a friend is like, I need to pitch this to my agent, or I need a query letter, I'm trying to get an agent, I'm like, call me, get me on the phone.
Well, I think, through the experience of doing this series specifically, I think people don't have an idea of what networking truly entails, right? There is the point of contact, the main point, but a lot of it is, as you said, the fostering of that initial contact, and being able to balance that and work with that. So, and toot your own horn all you want. If you're good at something, let people know you're good at it. Like, we're here. But yes, so thank you so much for your time. Speaking of, networking and being on the show, I'm so grateful that you were able to, or willing to, come on here. And thanks to Caroline as well at Angry Roma.
Oh, we love Caroline. Mwah.
Oh, she's just such a wonderful human. So before we go, though, I want to give everyone a chance to do a little bit of a sign off. Of course, we'll start with you, Saint. Can you tell us anything you have coming up, or anything you want people to keep their eyes on, or, of course, your most recent releases with the Summoning Circle, the busy year that you've had? Just let people know where they can find you, where they can find your work, and all these amazing themes that we talked about today.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful cue up. I am Saint. I write under the name S.T Gibson, in case you missed it at the top of the show. You can find me on Instagram at S.T Gibson Author. You can also find me at my newsletter, saint.substack.com, which is the best way to keep in touch with me. I only email out about once a month, and that is where I share everything about what I'm working on, cover reveals, new releases, sales, and a little bit about what I'm reading and what I'm watching and the perfume I'm wearing, and we can just all get to know each other, and it's very, very cozy. In terms of what I have cooking, I am cooking the Summoner Circle series. Book 2 in the Summoner Circle series will come out next summer. That is Reese's book. So if you like angsty, emo, bisexual Catholic men who summon demons for fun, I highly suggest that you check this one out. But it is the second in a series, and Evocation is out now, and so is Odd Spirits, which is the baby prequel that tees up the whole series. So there's plenty for you to read if you want queer magicians in Boston trying to make love work and also fighting demons. And I'm currently working on a erotic gothic series that I have coming out from Orbit next fall. And the first book is called Savage Blooms. And it's like if Sierra Simone's Thorn Chapel series meets Wuthering Heights meets a little bit of Arthuriana meets Rocky Horror Picture Show. And if you like how dark and sexy Dowry was, you're not going to want to miss this one. That's my pitch.
Well, I would say you're damn good at it. First time I've heard of that book, and I'm convinced.
There we go.
Count me in.
Add it on Goodreads. Savage Blooms.
I will have the link down below, everyone, so you can add that. Of course. Also, Saint's website and everything that you've just mentioned will all be in the description down below. Please go and check all of that out. So my wonderful co-host PL, if you could just tell people where to find you and what you've got going on.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Saint, for joining. This was just a real treat. So enjoyed it, and
Thank you for having me.
can't wait to read your books in the future. So, yeah, PL Stuart, you find me beside. I always get it mixed up. It's this way. Beside my wonderful co-host Taylor on Page Chewing, and my own channel, The Drown Kingdom Saga 7847, and 6 Elemental Interviews, which I've been doing a lot of recently. As for the books, The Drown Kingdom Saga, that's www.plstuart.com. Book 5, A Pack of Wolves, coming out in the spring of 2025, and excited to be getting closer to completion of this 7-book series. Website I mentioned. Twitter is really where you can find me for the most part. It's at PL Stuart Writes. Same on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not there as often, however. Yeah, you can find me there. But typically, you can find me beside Taylor, where we do page chewing, and we get the real privilege and honor of interviewing wonderful guests such as Saint.
Thank you. Yeah, one day we'll get the pointing right, PL, but it is not this day. I don't know if that day will ever come. It's kind of part of our brand now. So my name is Taylor. My channel is Made Between the Pages. You can find me on Page Chewing very often with PL. I am also a Spiffbo judge over at Before We Go blog, the self-published fantasy blog off. And I'm also an assistant editor over there as well. I'm kind of all over the bookish space, so all of my links, as always, will be down below. But Page Chewing is my baby. This is my joy of being in the bookish space. So truly, we do, once more, thank you, Saint, for coming on. This is a very in-depth and enlightening discussion. I have so many things to chew on and think about now. But thank you to everyone in the chat and anyone who watches this after. You are who makes this series what it is. Your interactions are really the core of this. So thank you for tuning in. And we will see you on the next episode. Bye, everyone.